Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and I wanted to do a video about yes and no questions. Now, I have a video that was in like a walkthrough of, I think, of the Royal Mischief. I think it was the Royal Mischief playing cards. And then I go over how I do yes and no questions with playing cards. But I don't have a specific video about yes and no questions. And so I thought I would do a quick video about that. I don't know why I say quick video, who knows. I feel like this will be a quick video, but I'm making no promises. Look at the length of the time, decide whether or not that is something that you want to spend the time talking about. So, some people are fans of yes and no questions, other people are not fans of yes and no questions. I am a fan of yes and no questions with some caveats. I also am a fan of yes and no questions with certain systems. And so I do want to talk a little bit out the gate so that, I always feel like conversations go better when we kind of level the playing field of how do I see the world as it relates to yes and no questions, because it does affect the way you would use them. So as I say to anybody who's looking to work with any type of divination system, one of the first things that I think you need to come to terms with as an individual is, how do you see the world work? How do you see time work? How do you see the future occurring? How do you see the future as functioning within your worldview? If you believe that the future is set in stone and we are just moving inexorably towards a specific future, your way of interpreting and using future positions in cards, as well as yes and no, definitive yes and no questions, is going to look different than to somebody else who has, like myself, who believes that the future is always in flux. So my worldview, the way that I see the world and the way that I see the future, is that the future is always in flux because it is created in every moment by minute to large choices that we make. Now, I also believe that other people's choices and decisions have an impact on my future, right? I can be driving along and somebody could choose to drink heavily and drive, and I would get hit by the car. And that me getting hit by this particular drunk driver has a bunch to do with choices and all kinds of little choices and decisions that I make to go one way, go another, to even go out in the car that day, to pause an extra 10 seconds at a stoplight. Tons of choices and decisions that I've made, tiny ones to big ones, and then a bunch of decisions that that person makes that puts us on a collision course, right, in which I might get hit by that car. But I wouldn't have gotten hit by that car at all without that person's choices and decisions that they've made, right? So I'm not naive enough to assume that I am the captain of my own fate, and that everything in my future is decided by me and me alone. So there's a lot of flux between the people around us and as well as our own choices and decisions that affect exactly how our future is going to turn out. That's my view of the world, right? And so that determines how I look at future cards, as well as yes and no questions that have anything to do with the future. Now, I do believe that we are on greater swaths of destiny. So if you look at the 9th house in astrology, that to me has that understanding that we are on this greater journey, that while we may be making choices and decisions within this path, and it's fluxing, it's moving and shifting based on my choices and decisions and other people's things that impact me, I do think that we are often on a greater path. So there is a degree of destiny that is in part of my worldview, but that we have a lot of shifts and changes. And so when I look at doing a reading with a future position or a very concrete yes and no, or a yes and no about a future event, I'm always taking into account that what I'm doing is getting information that is going to help me make choices and decisions, or is going to help the person I'm reading for make the choices and decisions. This is really important to me as a person in the way that I see the world, but it's also really important to me as a reader, because I don't believe that any reading, yes and no or otherwise, should ever take away take away somebody's choice and or their responsibility for their own choices, right? A reading for me is giving of information or gaining of information if I'm getting it for myself, and I need to take that information, put it with all the other things that I have about information that I have, and then make a choice and decision and own that choice and decision, right? So if I do a reading about whether or not I should take a particular job, I'm going to take that information that I got out of the reading. I'm going to take the factors that are in my life. I need X amount of money to pay my bills. I'm currently maybe not able to make those bills, so I need the finances to be in order for this job. I'm coming from a really bad work environment. I don't care as much about the finances. I really care about the work environment. That's stuff I'm going to take into account. I'm taking, where is this job at? Is this a good move for me in my career? I have all this information over here, plus I have this reading information, and I'm taking both of those things, or all of those things, into account, and then I, as an individual human being, am making a choice that I have to own. That's how I see readings function. I also see future parts, as in, is this going to really work out for me? Where is this leading me? As giving me, this is a general trend of things, but I might be able to shift and change that based on my decisions, and other people might have some impact on that as well. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to at least very clearly make the point how important it is for you as an individual to know what you believe about how the world around you works, how energy around you works, what do you believe about the future? Do you believe in a fixed future? Do you believe in a malleable future? What is it that you believe? And then making sure that you're keeping that in mind as you are doing your readings. And then, of course, secondly, to always keep in mind that there is no reading of any sort that should do anything but give you information to make your own choices. You should never abdicate responsibility of choice or responsibility for your choices, ever. So this plays into account, I believe, more strongly even with yes and no questions, because it can be very easy to say, well, it said no, don't do it, so I'm not doing it. And now you've just given over responsibility of choice to a single reading versus using all of your information at your hands to make a conscious choice. And that to me is never a wise way to go. So when I approach yes and no readings, okay, so this is why it's important for me to know what I believe, because when I approach a yes and no reading, I'm truthfully not all that interested in just a hard yes or no, because there's two things about this that come into mind. One is what I just said, that I don't think we should ever abdicate responsibility or choice over to a single reading or multiple readings. We should be using other things to help us make that decision. And the second part, though, is that I don't believe in a black and white world. So the world that I exist in, and the world that I see, and the world that I've experienced is full of gray area. Or you could say it's full of rainbows. It's full of colors and variation and shifts. There's probably never, they say never, right? So, but I would say there's very rarely a black and white situation. And so when we just have the option for our system that we're using for yes and no to just say yes or no, period. I don't feel like there's a lot that doesn't really reflect the way the world is. I think that very often answers are yes, but, no, but, yes, and, no, and. There's always, there should be, in my opinion, always room for gaining that little bit more information that's more intuitive to the fact that yes, you should take this job, but be aware it's not going to be easy. It just may be the best decision for you right now. Or no, don't take that job. Yes, it could end up being good down in the long run, perhaps, but you're going to be really taking some upfront hits here this way. Or, you know, yes, you could stay in this relationship, but there's a lot of rocky roads ahead. But in the end, it's going to pay off. So just be prepared for that rocky road in the middle. Those types of nuanced things, to me, more clearly work to the world around us, in which there is very little that's black and white. You know, if you just think of something that you think is black and white, like, I mean, I don't know. Should I kill this puppy, right? Everybody loves puppies. Okay, maybe not everybody loves puppies, but I would say most of the world doesn't want to kill a puppy, right? That seems to be a very black and white. Don't do it. There's never an instance in which that is going to be good. But the truth of the matter is it's more complicated than that. What if this puppy is very, very sick and suffering? What if this puppy has been brutally injured by a car accident or something horrible that's happened, and in the end that animal is suffering, and the better choice is to put the dog out of its misery and allow its spirit to move on, because that's just a terrible circumstance. I know that's a big downer of an example, but you know, that seems like a very black and white, yes, that you know, no, never kill puppies. And yet in the end, there's always gray areas somewhere along the road. And yes, that's an extreme, but the point is that I'm not a huge fan, and nor do I really use systems that don't allow for that fluctuation, allow for that gray space, allow for, I want information more than I want a hard yes or a hard no. So that determines what I'm going to choose to use for yes and no questions. Now, I do think some things can actually offer too much variation to get a solid read on what it is. So, for example, these are things that I would use and do use for yes and no questions. These are things that I don't really use for yes and no questions. That does not mean that you can't. You certainly can do yes and no questions with anything that you choose to do so with. I think they're far more complicated, and part of the reasons are because of the system. So for this, we'll take tarot. This is 78 cards. They are not perfectly split between what you could easily see as maybe positive and negative cards, or anything like that. There is not a 50-50 split of light and shadow cards in tarot. In fact, it's nuanced, and it depends a lot to do with the question itself. So if I were to ask a question like, you know, should I take this job, and I were to pick 3 tarot cards, well, how I might, you know, read these cards could really fluctuate to determine whether or not I should take the job. So you could say, in general, some people might say that the 7 of Swords is a negative card, maybe, and some people might say that these 2 are good cards. So you would say, you know, the answer here would be yes, especially with the 6 of Wands here, right? So this is a little bit easier to say, but I actually don't see the 7 of Swords as a negative card. I see that as there's more, you need to dig a little bit deeper. And so with this at the front, even though we see really good things ahead, a sense of maybe being able to get to a really peaceful work environment, to get some acclaim, and some people might you know, see your achievements here, it's saying to look a little deeper. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface than what we might see. So you could say, arguably, you could say, things look really good on the surface, but there's something going on beneath the surface, and you need to think about this a little bit, right? So you're still getting an answer, but and I think this to me is probably a fairly easy answer for that. Or if you get something like the Sun, right? The 6 of Pentacles, but is this all an illusion, right? So can you do yes and no questions with tarot? Yes, most definitely. You can do everything. You know, if your system is is tarot and you do nothing else but tarot, you make it work for you. You get used to working with it and you come to your own way of working with it. So I'm not saying that you can't, but it's a lot more nuanced, and you're moving towards a lot of gray areas in terms of how you would interpret it. That may be a plus and that may be a negative depending on how you want to see it. Lenormand, some people might say, would be an even better way, right, to do this. It's more practical, you would say. It's more concise. It's more da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But Lenormand is not a system that is got 50-50 positive, negative, light, shadow, however you want to look at it. Lenormand is also not set up that way. And so you can look at these things and say, okay, well, for me, this would probably be a no. It's a new opportunity, but we've got the mice eating away at something. But then, wait. The mice doesn't just eat away at itself. It eats away at something, and so it's eating away at the birds, which I might read as anxiety. So in the end, if you just try to look at it clean, you might say, okay, one good card, two kind of negative cards, and so the answer would be no. But if you read this out, of course, we have the child card. It's a new opportunity that is going to eat away at anxiety. So your stress level might be coming down if you take this job, right? So it's a little bit more nuanced than just a straight yes and no. Here we have positive movement and loyalty on either side of a mountain, which is a challenge. Well, challenge isn't always a negative thing. Sometimes people thrive on challenge. So whether or not that challenge is going to be good or bad is going to be up to this person. So I think that while Lenormand is a little bit easier, maybe for some, to read than tarot, it's still going to be nuanced in how are you just choosing between good and bad cards, and big quotations all around that. But is it going to be based just on that, or are you interpreting the reading and then using that interpretation to determine whether that's a yes and no? This is a little bit closer. It's still, and I do them with Lenormand, but is not my preferred method, right? So my preferred method are things that it's, always I'm going to pull 3 cards because you want an odd number so that you can get 2 of something and 1 of the other in various combinations. It just works really well. I generally like to do playing cards, and we're going to talk over this, but these work equally as well. 3 dice. Dice are really nice because, again, I use active numbers as being yeses, and even numbers, odd numbers as active yes, even numbers as receptive no. So in geomancy, I use dice to cast geomancy. An active number is an odd number, a passive number is an even number. So one of the nice things about this is, so here we have 2 evens, right, and an odd. So these are no's and this is a yes. Now, one of the nice things about dice in this way is that you actually can use the number. So for example, if we had a 2 and a 6, this is a really strong yes, right? You can't get a higher yes than that. This is a bit of a weak yes. Okay, this is the highest no that you can get. And so you can start to build in some nuance with the actual numbers that are there. This is still 2 no's and a yes, but you kind of have a maybe not and a not, and then a pretty strong yes, and you can start to use that nuance to give you information, right? So I like things that do 3, and I do like about dice that you can sort of modify the strength of the yes and no based off of the number. These are just lovely. This is a gift that was given to me by Crone's Bones on Etsy for Embrace the Magical, and this is very similar to reading with playing cards. It's basically the same thing, except for you do have a maybe there. It's just a neutral maybe, whereas you have that built in, but it's neutral yes or neutral no. So you have yes and no on each side of the bone, and then of course you want to choose knuckle bones or bones that are going to be able to stand up on a side, to that third side. So you need that flat side so that it can be a maybe if it stands up on its own. And then when you cast it, we have two no's and a maybe. So there's some wiggle room there. There's some room for things to shift in the middle of things, but overall the answer appears to be no. And so I love, again, things that are threes, I think are really important in picking yes and no questions. So again, the two things that I remind myself as well as any client with yes and no is that there isn't a fixed future. So this is giving you information for your choice. And B, that you are responsible. We are responsible for making our own choices and decisions and owning those. And so always there should be other factors that you should take into play. With playing cards, I just think it's fabulous. Playing card reading is beautiful and clean in that there are 2 red suits and 2 black suits. Hearts are all considered positive cards. Diamonds would be considered neutral positive. So it's yes. All hearts would be yes, 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 full yes on a heart, and a maybe yes on a diamond. The spade suit is a full no, and the club suit is a maybe no. And so it gives you a perfectly balanced, exact same card numbers for yes as there are for no, as there are for maybe yes and probably not, right? So you have a perfectly balanced system for this, and which it makes, in my opinion, it to be ideal for the way that I like to read yes and no questions. So when you were to lay out 3 cards for yes and no, now you can, on all of these things, well, not these perhaps, so you could with numbers, but you could go on to actually do a reading with it as well and bring those together. But in terms of getting yes and no, we're really not doing we're not doing a playing card reading. We are just using the suit colors to determine, and where they show up, to determine, give us information for this yes and no. So we can see that we have 2 reds and a black. So in general, we're leaning towards yes. However, this is kind of a weak, right? We have 2 maybe yeses and a maybe not in the middle. And so overall things are going to turn out okay. There's going to be a bit of a rough spot in the middle, but it's going to be able to get more on track by the end. But none of these cards are really strong. We don't have any hearts. We don't have any spades. So in terms of energy, because I also am looking at what's the energy around a situation, there's not a strong energy here. This also can mean that it's open for fluctuation, right? So that means it's open for change. There's not a lot that's locked into place, and that can be very fortuitous for a situation. Let's say this was a relationship question that somebody said, should I stay in this relationship? And the answer here is yes. It's going to have a little bit of work to do that, but it's going to work out in the end. But it doesn't feel very yes, right? It doesn't feel very decisive, like, whoa, this is amazing. Yes, stay here. Like 3 hearts, right? So what this can mean, though, is that I have the information that says, sure, you can stay in this relationship. It's going to take some work. It's going to work out in the end, but there's a lot of room here for improvement. There's a lot of room to change this into a more solid yes by putting energy in, getting counseling, doing all kinds of work that you're going to do. This there's room for things to shift much more than, say, 3 spades or 3 hearts. So it can be an invitation to say, now you've got this kind of bit of information here, take this into account with what you feel. And maybe you would come to this and say, you know what? it just kind of feels lackluster, which is what my relationship feels like right now. And if I'm going to do any work in this relationship and I'm going to come out of this still feeling somewhat lackluster, this may be just, even though this is technically a yes, it may just be the time for me to say I'm really not looking for things to be same old, and keep going the way that they are. And so this gives me, yes, yeah, it says, yeah, I can make this work out, but I'm going to take what I know about it, the work that I've done, things of that, and say, this isn't really making the big changes that I want. And so maybe it's time for me to move on. I'm taking this information, adding it to what I'm already feeling, and then I'm making a choice based on those things that may not be, okay, yes means I need to stay here, and now I'm stuck here because I've got to stay here because the card said stay here, right? Things are always going to be in flux. With this one, we see things start out really well. Should I date this person? Whoa. We've got the Ace of Hearts here. Hearts are love and passion, and it's a solid yes. But then we see it getting more difficult and more difficult. So things are going to start out really great, and there's going to be something here that starts a downward trend towards things being more difficult. And so you say, okay, well, Kelly, that means no. The answer is no. I shouldn't go into this relationship. But you can also read this more nuance that say there's a lot of passion here, there's a lot of love here, there's a lot of potential here, but there's a situation that's going to come up that could take things moving in a downward spiral. If you're going to go for this, if you're going to say there's potential, I want to see where this potential goes, then you're going to have to do the work to shift that energy, because I don't believe a future is fixed. I don't believe that this is doomed. I would say, okay, I'm willing to do the work to make sure that the whatever challenges come up push me in the other direction rather in this direction. But I'm that strong yes at the beginning. I feel hopeful. I feel potential in this my interactions with this person. I feel the potential there. And so I'm going to choose to go into this with the warning at hand that things could get a little bit rocky here, and I'm gonna work hard to give it this option, and I'm gonna understand that the potential there is there, and I'm gonna do the work to move the energy in the direction that I want it to go in. So I'm taking the information, and I'm not just saying the answer is no, I'm saying, okay, this potential, I'm banking on this potential, and I'm willing to do the work in the middle to shift that maybe no back into the yes. I'm willing to do that work. Okay, so now we have a maybe not, and two big yeses, right? At the end, two hearts. So we're like, okay, the answer is yes, right? This is a nice positive yes. It's not three, right? It's not all hearts, which would be the best ever, but it is two hearts, so two solid yeses to one weak no. So we know that things, we understand that things are going to start a little bit rocky. It may not be super smooth at the beginning, but it's really going strongly to a positive way forward. So I'm going to weather out this little bit of rockiness here before I get to because I want to get to those two strong hearts, right? It's worth it to me to do that because I'm going to be able to get to some strong energy here, knowing that I have to put the work into this. And that's the other thing that I want to throw in here as well, is that, and this is with all readings, but I think the potential's high with yes and no readings to mess things up, because I believe that our future is made by our choices and decisions, which we've already talked about. Let's say somebody comes to me and they say, I've used this example a million times, but it really works well. If somebody comes and says, I have a master's, I'm going to do my master's exam on Friday, how am I going to do on it, right? Am I going to pass? And so I do this particular reading for them, and I say, yes, it's going to be, it's going to be a little bit rocky. It's not going to be a breeze right through, but it's a strong yes that you're going to be able to pass it. And then what happens? That person does, oh, I've got this in the bag. Yeah, it's gonna, some questions are gonna trip me up, but I've got this nailed. Two red hearts. I've got this covered. They go out that night and they stop studying as much. They go out and they are partying all night, so that by the time it comes to their exam that they're doing, they haven't slept well, they haven't studied really that much more, and they drank a lot of alcohol, and they go and take the test and they failed because they've taken information that as the energy of the card, as of when that card reading was done, they were moving in this good trajectory. They were studying, they were moving in this good trajectory to pass the exam, and then they completely changed the trajectory by changing what they were doing, and now they failed the test. Vice versa, let's say somebody asked me, same question, how am I going to do on this exam, and they get 3 no's. A hard no and some probably not. It's not looking good. And they say to themselves, I'm like, technically the answer is no, you're not going to pass it, right? If you're just going hard no. But if they're smart, right, and if I would obviously say this to the person or to myself that says, as things look right now, it's not looking good. So I need to change up the way that I'm studying. I need to start, studying more. I need to change the way I'm studying. I need to read my notes into a recorder so that I can listen to it, because I respond better to things that I can listen. Or I need to rewrite my notes more concisely, so that, because in the act of writing, that helps me to study. I need to get together with a tutor to give me some tips as what I need to shift up, and I do the work that I have to do, and I go to the test and I pass the test. And it's not that this was wrong, it was that the answer gave us the information that as things were going, it's not looking good. So now what choices and decisions do you need to make to move things into a better direction? So you can still do yes and no questions with the understanding that this is just giving us information on what do we need to choose from here on out. How do we need to react to the reading so that we can move to the direction that we want to move in. So I do love yes and no questions when they are, again, read in this manner in which there is information gathered, not just straight yes and no's. So as a bit of a recap, because I know this wasn't much of a tutorial and more of a discussion, diamonds and hearts are yes. Hearts are a solid yes, and diamonds are a maybe yes. There's more fluctuation there. Spades are a harder no, and clubs are a maybe no. And so you can imagine that if you pull 3 cards and all 3 cards are hearts, that's a really positive yes, right? Then again, you can get into nuances even further if you choose. This is where you can see that 3 cards, playing cards, or even 3 dice can give you more information than you might think. But again, I'm trying to stay fairly concise here. But you can even say, okay, we've got a kind of low energy yes, still a lower, and then we have a really solid energy yes here, where things are building. So you can look at that and say, okay, keep working to build up to that higher yes, right? So you can start to look at more nuances there. But in general, that's a really solid yes, versus say, okay, well, we've got yes, yes, and yes. There's room for fluctuation here. And then, of course, when we even get to the heart, it's a low-end heart, so to speak, a low number heart. So we've still got a yes, but there's more room for fluctuation. The energy maybe isn't as locked in, and it's going to be, you might want to put more if you want this, if you're like, okay, I really do, am I going to get this job? I get this. The answer is yes, but there does feel like there's wiggle room here. You might really still, of course, want to be amping up and saying, what, I do want this job, so now I'm going to start doing whatever I can do to bring that energy even more solidly towards achieving what I'm trying to achieve, right? Same thing, but conversely, if you're looking at no questions and the answer is, you know, no with all clubs, that's a lot of energy that's in flux. So the answer might be no, you're probably not going to get this job. There's still room here. There's a lot more room to, what do I need to do to shift that energy, versus if you had you know, 3 spades that were 3 solid no's. It's going to take more work to achieve, to shift that energy than it's going to just for things to just kind of go as they're naturally going. So yes, maybe yes, no, probably not. Draw in sets of 3s because you need to have that odd number to be able to you know, get that nuance there. Of course, you can choose. Maybe you do believe in fixed futures, and for you, just having 2 reds and a black, it just means no. It's beaten, you know, it's beaten the odds here. 1 red, 2 blacks, the answer is no. 3 blacks is a really solid no. 3 reds are a really solid yes, and you don't go into any of those nuances there. That's just going to depend on your way of approaching things. And again, if you're looking at, you know, something that you have sets of 3 like this, we've got 3 yeses and a no. Things are going to go really good, but we've got this no at the end. The answer is still yes, but we've got this nuance of think something might be going to trip things up along the way, and to be aware of that and to watch for that. I think she gives, and I'm probably not going to read this without my glasses. I think I just use these the way that I do my playing cards, but let's see. So this is a yes, yes, no. That's yes, yes, maybe, very, very favorable. Yes, yes, no, yes, but with some minor difficulties. So even on her little Crone thing, again, you can see the nuanced answers. Yes, 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 maybe, yes, yes, no, yes, maybe, no. There's nuances. It could go either way. So if you got a yes, a maybe, and a no, this really could go in either direction, right? And so the energy is really still in flux here. So I do really love this. Now, again, I just read this as if they are, you just have less nuance in between the cards. But the maybe, it brings in that. So in this set, right, you can get 3 coins and just write yes, yes, maybe. So you'd have yes and no on, you need something with 3 sides really to get, I think, a good nuance like this. That's why these work so beautifully, is because that maybe comes into play in with that side there. So here we have again a yes and a no and a maybe, although this maybe is really leaning more towards the no. So bones are fun because you do get some nuances there. I really love that. Of these things, these are my favorite. I haven't had these forever, but I have been playing with them since I got them. And again, you know, dice, everybody has dice, so it's great to play around. We've got 4s, which are, you know, we have 3 no's here. We don't get as much nuance, although these are fairly, well, 4, you know, 6 is as high as it can go, so it's kind of like a no, but there's still some fluctuation there if you use the numbers. But this is just something, if you have dice and you want to play with. Most people have a deck of playing cards, and I truly do believe this is one of the best ways to get really interesting, nuanced yes and no answers that give you information to work with, or are just cut dry yes and no if you choose for that to be the case. So these 2 are definitely my favorites. These are something that you already have. You could also take 3 coins and have, you know, heads be yes and tails be no, and then you got your 2 versus your 1. Again, you don't get the nuance that you get with playing cards or with the maybe in a set of bones. but you can do a yes and no question that way. So just some things to chew on, and think about that. Maybe yes and no's aren't quite so cut and dry, depending on the way that you see the world. And to also remember, if you're doing yes and no questions for yourself, and especially for somebody else, nothing that we do in a single reading should ever take away somebody's choice. We should be giving information for them to make choices, to help make choices. And on the other side of that, as the person getting the reading, or as a person reading for self, you should never abdicate your responsibility for your own choices to a reading either. You should take that information in, add it to the pile of all the other work that you're doing, and make an informed decision that way and be responsible for your choices. So there we go. Hope you enjoyed this, and I wish you a absolutely wonderful rest of your day.